Good morning, everybody. We're going to wait a couple minutes to get started, just until 11 o'clock, so we make sure everyone is here. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming to this read aloud. We are going to be reading the book that is called Bone Button Borscht, written by Aubrey Davis. And before we get started, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions just to keep in mind throughout the story. And since this book, if you've ever heard of the book called Stone Soup, this is similar to that book, but it is written from the perspective of a Jewish cultural lens. So to start off, I want everybody to think if they've ever met anybody who is Jewish or if they're familiar with any Jewish traditions. And we also are going to have special words that we hear throughout the story today. Some that we should hear throughout the story are synagogue, which is similar to a church. It's a place that people who are Jewish go and do services and pray and go and have a quiet place to think. There is the shamas, which is the synagogue's caretaker. The shamas is the one who takes care of the synagogue and makes sure that everything is in order. And then we have a phrase that is called Shalom Aleichem, which means peace be with you. So those are three of our special words we'll hear throughout the book. And then we have some very special vocabulary words, which every time you hear these words, I want you all to tap on your nose just to remind yourself that you've heard the word. And the words are beggar, miracle, scoffed, ridiculous, and impossible. So we have beggar, miracle, scoffed, ridiculous, and impossible. So listen very carefully for those words throughout the book, and we will go ahead and get started. So this is Bone Button Borscht. One dark winter's night, a ragged little beggar hobbled along a lonely road. It was snowy and bitter and cold, but in his head it was warm and rosy. He saw a blazing fireplace and a table loaded with bowls of borscht, noodle pudding, roast chicken, fruits, nuts, and a jug of wine. And his host was saying, "More chicken, Mr. Beggar?" And he was saying, "Oh no, I couldn't possibly eat another bite." There is nothing like being a beggar, he thought. Such good it brings out in people. They share, they give, and me, I get a little something too. It's perfect. The beggar reached the crest of a hill. He peered out through the driving snow into the night. So, where's the town? He asked himself. There should be a town at the bottom of this hill. I can't see it. And he walked downhill. As he walked downhill, his small, shadowy houses slowly took shape on his left and on his right. Fine, he said. Now I see the town. But where are the lights? Where are the people? He knocked on the door. Please, a little food for a poor starving beggar, he cried. A face appeared in the frosty window, then vanished. There was footsteps and then silence. The beggar went to another house and knocked. Please help me, I'm hungry and cold. Go away, called the voice from within. Just let me in for a few minutes even. No, go away. So the beggar moved on from house to house and door to door, but no one would help him. What is wrong with these people, he wondered. How do you think that the beggar felt when he was turned away from everybody in the town? He trudged further down the road, and suddenly he spotted a line of thin light through the snow. He followed it into a crack in the doorway, pushed the door open, and went inside. It was a synagogue. Thank God for a synagogue, he cried and rushed inside. As he warmed himself by the stove, he looked around the room. Suddenly, he spotted a man in the shadows. It was the synagogue caretaker, the Shamas. Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you, called the beggar. The Shamas did not answer. Strange, thought the beggar. A glimmer crept into his eye, and the corners of his mouth turned up ever so slightly. He had an idea. What do you think his idea was? He grabbed one of the bone buttons off of his coat and tugged. Off came a button. Off came another button, and another and another. Still, the Shamas did not speak, but now he was looking at the beggar. Now he was curious. The beggar counted the buttons. There were 5. Oi, if only I had one more button, he said. The Shamas said nothing. Oi, if only I had one more button. Still, the Shamas was silent. Oi, if only I had one more button. Finally, the Shamas spoke. Look, mister, I won't give you a button. Nobody in this town will give you a button. Why not? Asked the beggar. Because we're poor, Mr. Beggar. We don't give even to each other anymore. So why should we give a button to a stranger? Why? Asked the beggar. Because with one more button, I can make us a soup. I can make us a nice hot borscht. That's ridiculous, scoffed the Shamas. Impossible. Nobody makes borscht from buttons. Mr. Shamas, said the beggar, I'm shocked. Haven't you ever heard of bone button borscht? Bone button borscht, asked the Shamas. Let me explain, said the beggar. These buttons in my hand are very special. With just one more button from you, I can make the bone button borscht for the whole town. I can make you a miracle, Mr. Shamas. Naturally, the Shamas was very curious. All right, he cried, I'll get the button, and he ran to the door. Wait, called the beggar. I'll need bowls and cups, and a knife, and a ladle, and a spoon. Oh, and a big pot, maybe. The Shamas sped down the road to the tailor's door and knocked. Mendel, please, give me a bone button, he called. No, go away, shouted Mendel. No, Mendel, you don't understand. The button isn't for me, said the Shamas. It's for the little beggar in the synagogue. He's going to make a miracle. With my bone button? Asked Mendel. What's he going to do? Raise it from the dead? Teach it to sing, maybe? No, Mendel, he needs it for the borscht. He's going to make borscht from buttons. That's impossible, scoffed Mendel. Nobody can make borscht from buttons. Listen, Mendel, said the Shamas. Give me the button. What's it going to hurt? Maybe we'll have a miracle. All right, replied Mendel. I'll give you the button, but I want to come too. I want to see this miracle. So come, said the Shamas. They ran to the house next door and knocked. Leah, Leah, give us a wooden spoon, they cried. No, she shouted, go away. Leah, it's not for us. It's for the little beggar in the synagogue. He's going to make a miracle. With my spoon? Asked Leah. What's he going to do? Use it to part the Red Sea? Teach it to dance, maybe? No, Leah, he needs it for the borscht. He's going to make a borscht from buttons. That's impossible, scoffed Leah. Look, Leah, give us the spoon. What's it going to hurt? Maybe we'll have a miracle. All right, replied Leah. But I want to come. I want to see the miracle. So come, said the Shamas and the tailor. And my family too, she added. So bring them, they said. So Leah, her family, Mendel, and the Shamas marched down the street. They banged on doors, they begged, and they borrowed cups, bowls, a ladle, and a knife, and a huge soup pot. Along with all these things, the crowd grew. As it chattered its way up the street down toward the synagogue, others came to their windows and doors. Where are you going? They asked. What are you doing with that pot? And the people in the street replied, there's some beggar in the synagogue who says he can make borscht from buttons. That's impossible, shouted the people from the houses. But they were curious. So they grabbed their hats and coats and joined the others. By the time the Shamas reached the synagogue, the whole town was with him. The people crammed themselves inside. The beggar looked up and cried, Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you. There was a long silence. Then someone called out, so Mr. Miracle Man, make us a miracle. You want a miracle, the beggar said. I'll give you a miracle. Pot, he cried. They put the pot on the stove. Water, they poured in the water. Button, and they gave him the button. Plunk, plunk, plunk. The beggar dropped in all of the bone buttons. He picked up the wooden spoon and stirred. Can we all stir our pots? When the pot began to steam and bubble, he spooned out some water and took a sniff. Not bad, he said, but it could be better. What could make it better? Asked the people. A little sugar, a little salt, a little pepper, that could make it better, replied the beggar. So they brought him sugar and salt and pepper, and he sprinkled them all into the pot and stirred. Then he took another sniff. Not bad, he said, but it could be better. What could make it better? Asked the people. Have you got any pickle juice? That could make it better, replied the beggar. So they brought him pickle juice and he poured it into the pot. The beggar stirred and then he stopped. He looked at the people, he looked at the pot. He looked at the people again. Then he shook his head. You've got problems, Mr. Beggar? Asked the Shamas. The beggar frowned. Wait, said the Shamas. He ran to the cupboard and brought back a bulb of garlic. Would this help, Mr. Beggar? He asked. Why not? Laughed the beggar. Mr. Beggar, I've got some carrots, someone said. And I've got beets, called another. I've got onions. I've got beans. Would these help, Mr. Beggar? They asked. They wouldn't hurt, laughed the beggar. So the people ran off and returned with their arms full of vegetables. The beggar sliced them all. He diced, he chopped, he shredded, and then he dumped them all into the bubbling pot. And he stirred that borscht round and round. Do you know what we have here? Asked the beggar. We have a beautiful borscht. That's what we have, a very tasty borscht. Now, some people say a little bit of cabbage really brings out the flavor, but I say keep it simple. Who needs cabbage for borscht? At the back of the synagogue, a woman waved her arms. Mr. Beggar, you want cabbage? I've got cabbage, Mr. Beggar. Before he could reply, the woman was gone. She returned with a sack full of cabbages and handed it to the beggar. He looked at the cabbages, he looked at the people. Then he shrugged his shoulders and began to chop. He chopped until every last cabbage had been added to the borscht. The people watched the steam rise from the pot. They listened to the bubbling borscht. They smelled the rich, sweet, and sour aroma as it filled the synagogue. Bellies rumbled and mouths watered. Everyone pressed in closer, and the beggar finally ladled some borscht into a cup. It was deep, red, and thick with vegetables. He blew on it, he blessed it, then he dipped in his spoon and he tasted it. So, Mr. Beggar, how does it taste? The beggar smiled. Not bad. Who wants to try some? Everyone in the room rushed forward. They snatched cups and they grabbed bowls. Borscht, 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 they chanted. The beggar patiently ladled steaming hot borscht into every bowl and cup. Soon everyone was sipping and slurping borscht. Then the people raised their arms. They rolled their eyes toward heaven and they cried out, delicious, perfectly delicious. This is the best borscht we have ever tasted. The little beggar did it. He's made borscht out of a button. It's a miracle. Then, like magic, bread appeared and boiled potatoes and roast chicken and wine. The people ate and they laughed. They laughed and they ate. Then they brought out accordions and violins, and they sang and danced for hours after delightful hour. Then, when the last slurp of borscht was slurped, the last dance danced, and the last song sung, the Shamash invited the beggar to spend the night at his house. The next night, another family took him in, then another and another. One day, the beggar gathered the townfolk together to say goodbye. Please don't go, they begged. I must, he said. But your buttons. How can we make borscht without your magic bone buttons? And how can I fasten my coat without my buttons? Asked the beggar. How can I keep warm without buttons? So they traded with the beggar. They gave him brass buttons for bone buttons, and then the beggar left. They never saw him again. The years passed. One by one, the beggar's bone buttons were lost. It's a strange thing, a wonder perhaps. The town folks learned that they didn't really need the buttons. They learned to make the borscht without them, and they learned to help one another without borscht, even in the hard times. That was the real miracle the beggar left behind. The end. I want to thank everybody for listening to our story today, and I want to leave you with a couple of questions and maybe some goals for the weekend. So as you head into the weekend, we should keep the story message of our beggar's miracle in mind. As he taught the town to work together and help each other, even in times of need, he taught them how important it is to just give what you can when you can. So as everyone is going into this weekend, I want you all to think of either something nice that you can do for somebody else this weekend, or if you find yourself needing some help this weekend, make sure to ask for it. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much, and be sure to join us at 1 o'clock for our next reading.